At a midsummer folk festival, several murders are linked to an old folk song. And you thought folk fans got violent when Dylan went electric. We're talking eels and eggs.
The history of folk music.
And the Barnaby's terrible taste in music on this episode of
Welcome to Midsomer.
Come sit by me, all you fine lords and laddies, and I'll tell you the tale of young John Henry.
Hello, and welcome to Midsomer, the podcast where we dissect all the mysteries, the murders, and the many weird things about the long-running hit TV show, Midsomer Murders. I'm your host, Eric Buscher. With me, as always, is my co-host, Eileen Becker. Hey, Eileen.
Hey, Eric. Today we're talking about the Ballad of Midsomer County, the third episode of the 17th series. It originally aired February 11th, 2015. It was directed by Rennie Rye and written by Paul Logue. Let's tune up those guitars.
Spoiler warning, we will be discussing the events of this episode, including the identity of the murderer, so if you haven't watched it yet, don't want to know who done it, pause this and go watch it. We will still be here when you get back.
Every morning, the same song.
Betty's breakfast tune.
Wouldn't she like to hear something else once in a while?
Babies like consistency. The same song every day makes her feel secure.
Makes me feel like ending it all.
It's not that bad.
Well, that's easy for you to say. You never had any tasted music.
Well, that's not true.
3 words. Black Lace Album. Nelson.
On a moonlit night in the village of Lower Crosby, a hooded figure walks through the woods towards the darkened home of a sleeping Toby Winning, the founder of a local folk music festival. They break in and find a large bowl in which they put live eels and eggs. A noise wakes Winning, and as he asks, "Is someone there?" and finds the bowl, he gets his face pushed into it until he drowns. The next day, Winning's housekeeper, Liz Gray, stares at his dead body in the bowl while sipping her coffee. She calls the police after finishing her coffee and washing the mug. DCI John Barnaby is called to the scene while in the middle of a music debate with his wife, Sarah. What a coincidence! Liz's son, Brian, worked with Winning at the festival. She doesn't have many kind words towards Winning, calling him a buffoon working with her boy's genius. She's also not a fan of Winning's estranged wife, Alice, a folk singer. Alice says their impending divorce is amicable and mutual, and last saw him the previous night when Winning held a party for the opening of the festival and told all the locals that he was moving the whole shebang to London. Shockingly, the locals were not happy. Folk lovers, they want to keep it pure. So in the village, all these angry musicians now meet with Brian to discuss Winning's death, because news spreads quickly. Brian intends to keep the festival going in Toby's memory, as well as to keep the move on to London in Toby's memory. So there's still a lot of unhappy people, including local musician and pub owner Frank Wainwright, the owners of Hotel George, Tom and Claire Asher, and local soundman Danny Carver. Also running around is Jay Templeton, a rising star in the future of folk music, and Danny's daughter Melody, an aspiring singer. So Barnaby and D.I. Nelson are informed by coroner Kate that Winning drowned. Duh. She also says they were just common eggs and eels. Rude. But these are a reference to an old folk song about a hunter named John Henry who is lured by a beautiful maiden in the woods to a cottage where she kills him. The song? The Ballad of Midsomer County. Which explains a lot about this show if you really think about it. The song is apparently a folk classic, which Alice herself performed on her debut album. Which is weird because she claims to have no idea what eels and eggs could possibly refer to. And also, the divorce, turns out, was not as amicable as she claims, and the money was way less than she was promised. She admits to attempting to seduce Winning the night of the murder, but found his body instead and didn't report it, so she's kind of a big liar. Investigating a phone call Winning received from a remote phone box, Nelson finds an old boarded-up house registered to Danny Carver. He notices someone in the woods watching him, but loses them when he gives chase. So the house actually belonged to Danny's brother, Johnny Carver, a famous folk musician who committed suicide there 20 years ago. He was in a group with Danny and Frank, and his death made Danny bitter towards the music industry, which is why he is so upset when Melody attempts to play a set at the festival using Johnny's guitar. The detectives interview Brian, who has no alibi. Secretly, Brian is in trouble with the London backers who want more money, but Brian's already spent most of that, leaving him and Winning broke. He also has no idea where Winning's missing laptop is, but does find it in the attic And on it is a file with a legendary missing album from Johnny Carver that he was working on at the time of his death. This is a lost artifact that Winning had been looking for years. Too bad later that night, Brian investigates some music coming from one of the performance halls and is crushed to death by falling amps. The killer takes the laptop and puts roses in Brian's mouth. Tourist info: Laura Crosby, located conveniently on Crosby Road, only appears in this episode of Midsomer Murders. It has a mildly well-attended annual folk festival that brings in some of the top musicians in Lower Crosby. Unless it's moving to London, then, come for the woods. They got some nice woods.
The woods are a little scary, though.
All woods are.
Especially at night.
So the title of this episode is The Ballad of Midsomer County. That is also the name of the song that is this whole episode seems to revolve around. Eileen, is The Ballad of Midsomer County the true theme song to Midsomer?
It really is, because if you take about half of the episodes, it's basically the plot with a lot more bodies. More than just poor John Henry.
So in the song, there's a lot of details that the killer uses for his murders in this episode. Roses, there's a juniper bush, and most disgustingly, the eggs and eels. What do you think the heritage of this folk song really is?
Within the world of Midsomer, this would be a very old folk song. It seems to predate the Industrial Revolution. It talks about a man who goes hunting. There's something a bit pagan about the woman in the hut, the beautiful woman in the hut. There's almost something that is more medieval, that has more in common with a medieval plot, than the changes that came through folk music later on. It is definitely a very storytelling ballad, very traditional in that way. And there is a shorter version and a longer version. The juniper bush is mentioned in the longer version, but not the shorter version.
The storytelling reminds me a bit of The Maiden's Splendor, which is another older story about murder in Midsomer. It does seem that murder is quite in the roots of this county.
Midsomer is soaked in blood from the very beginning. I wouldn't be surprised if way back in the dawn of human civilization there, the first two people had a whole Romulus and Remus blood feud.
Are you saying this is where Cain and Abel were from?
It could be.
I did think it was interesting that there's a big deal about this lost album of Johnny Carver, the lost version of this song that they find on the laptop. And it's the exact same version of the song that Kate plays for them on the phone.
She got it early.
She got that early dead drop.
Yeah. Dead drop. Bump, bump.
I also kind of love the use of the song, especially at the beginning, with the whole opening murder. But then they cut straight into the regular Midsomer Murders theme, and it's such a jarring shift because you have this like hauntingly beautiful, lute sound that just like does not go well with the theremin at all.
And the same at the very end when she is performing the song. It also kind of has a sharp cut to the theme song, and it is a really beautiful, hauntingly evocative song. I think it works extremely well.
It slaps.
Yeah. When you watch the show as many times as we do and kind of listen to it, I didn't get tired of the song, which is unusual.
There is a soundtrack album available to this episode that features multiple versions of this song. The version sung by Seth Lakeman, the version sung by Lucy Jones, a duet they do together, as well as the other folk songs that we hear throughout the episode, and all the theme music or the background music that is used in the episode.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I listened to that album. The only thing I thought was really memorable was the Ballad of Midsomer, although it was nice to hear Clark Peters sing his song on there.
And Johnny Has Gone for a Soldier is a very well-known ballad that I was familiar with. It was used a lot in it's an Irish ballad, but was used a lot in the Ken Burns Civil War series as a part of the soundtrack to that.
You know, Lakeman wrote this song for the episode specifically. He was hired for it. And he and Lucy Jones basically recorded their version in a day. But it's very haunting, and you can find that pretty much on any music streaming app, I think. Should we talk about the Lower Crosby Folk Music Festival?
It's like all the music festivals in Midsomer. It needs a few more people to come to it to be really successful.
Yeah, I'm really beginning to wonder how these things, like, everyone's like, this is our big moneymaker. And I'm like, what is your cost of living? Because I want to move there. If that's all you need to make your money for the year, that's all. Like, I'm good. I'll come live in Midsomer. I'll risk the shortened lifespan.
I live in a fairly smallish town, and we have a few music festivals throughout the year that look slightly better attended than this one. And we have to have those extra music festivals, as well as all the other stuff that goes on through the year. So you can't live on a single folk music festival.
Well, as I point out, like, it's supposed to be this big major folk festival. There's only one apparently recognizable talent that we ever actually see perform, and that is Doofus in a Hat, Jay Templeton. Man, that hat was a terrible choice. But all the other musicians just seem to live in town. Sort of like a big folk festival where we just let all the locals play.
Yeah, this is one of the music-based episodes, along with the X-Men Cometh Masterclass and Midsummer Rhapsody. The X-Men Cometh, as we mentioned, was also centered around a music festival, so there's a lot of comparisons that we can have there.
But that one, they actually filmed it on like off days of a real music festival, a rock festival. Yes. So they actually, it actually looked like people came and attended this thing, as opposed to like the cost of like getting all these extras to actually have a folk festival that would seem huge. I think you would lose 2 episodes of a season just to cover the cost of that. One thing I kind of noticed, and I've always noticed this, and I just wanted to point out how close is Coston to all these villages, because it seems like they can go back and forth to the office super quick, and they don't seem to lose like hours on the road. The first 40 minutes of this episode is all on the first day, and they're just going zipping back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. They never set up like an incident room.
No. So I assume that this is not that far out of Corsten that they would need to, because they do that in some other episodes where they set up a local incident room. And I assume that those are the ones that are a little further away.
Maybe they just stopped doing that because, like, hey, that's an extra set.
Yeah. Or this is basically, just a little suburb of, Corsten.
So the Gray family, they seemed a little close.
Not quite Rainbirdish, but not that far from it.
Living together, making him breakfast, bringing him lunch, the weird building up of her boy.
Yeah, it was a little creepy there.
It was unnerving.
Yeah. I thought it was weird that the photo of her as a child on his desk seemed very old-fashioned. It was black and white, and it looked like, something from the 30s rather than, say, the 60s or the 70s when she would have been a child.
But I thought her reaction to the death of her son was one of the more better acted scenes of grief in this series. You don't get a lot of super grieving episodes, but this one just seemed to be, you don't get a lot of episodes where people are expressing too much grief, usually because the people getting murdered are not that great. But this one, and he still wasn't that great, but
his mom
loved him very dearly.
Yes.
All right. So obviously, since this centers around the history of folk music, Eileen's going to take us to her history corner and talk about the history of folk music.
As Eugene Levy said in A Mighty Wind, seeing these long lines of fans who want nothing more than to have you sign an autograph, it's like 1968, or 67, or 66. Well, let's just keep going back in time. Folk music is considered the music of the people. It deals with the lives and problems of the common folk and tells their stories, often in a participatory mode, through singing, playing instruments, and even dance. Its influences run deep into prehistory, as musical storytelling has long been a product of human civilization. Tales of hunts and battles and heroic journeys were sung by troubadours who traveled from town to town. These developed into the narrative song format called the ballad. Others learned the songs, often changing words and details and tunes along the way. The oral tradition of folk music gave rise to often hundreds of variations of the same song, as those songs journeyed along trade routes and on ships. Different cultures developed different styles of singing and playing instruments, and instruments moved and were adapted as people migrated and brought their traditions with them. In Europe during the Middle Ages, these folk music traditions began to influence liturgical music, despite an attempt to suppress it as a pagan leftover. Folk music became more accepted in Europe during the Renaissance, and William Shakespeare even used some folk songs in his plays. While the influence of folk music waned during the Baroque period, it got a big resurgence during the Romantic era, with its back-to-nature aesthetic and idealization of the rustic life. Many stories and folk music motifs were incorporated into classical music, such as in the works of Czech composer Antonin Dvorak and Edvard Grieg of Norway. It also was adopted by nationalist movements, which tended to glorify rural life in opposition to what was regarded as decadent urban life and art. With the spread of literacy, more of the songs were preserved in written form as well. Many folk songs are tragic ballads that tell the stories of untimely deaths and lost loves, while others are raucous ditties, often with some not too subtle sexual innuendo. The Trees They Grow So High tells the story of a woman who is married off to a young man much younger than she is, but she outlives him when he is killed in battle. Brave Benbow, we know who Benbow is, but this is a different Benbow, is a great example of an alehouse folk song that uses repeated phrases as it tells its story of a famed and real-life admiral. In Scarborough Fair, a man sends a list of impossible tasks to his old love. As more country folk moved to cities during the Industrial Revolution, which started in the late 18th century, work songs joined the traditional canon of folk music themes of rural life and the cycle of the year. Music halls were now part of the landscape where it was performed. Protest songs also were written and were a major influence on the American folk music revival that started in the 1930s. While often associated with singer-songwriters such as Woody Guthrie, Burl Ives, and Gene Ritchie, the Delta blues strain of folk music influenced the music of Bessie Smith, Lead Belly, and Paul Robeson. From Appalachia to Memphis to New York City, the influence of folk music on what is called popular music cannot be understated, as they exist in the same ecosystem. There is no country music, rhythm and blues, and rock and roll without the various strains of folk music. In the post-World War II era, folk music became less associated with nationalism and more with social protest movements. Pete Seeger sang in support of the labor movement and for civil rights, and in the 1960s, anti-war protest songs joined the canon. Bob Dylan, Judy Collins, and Joan Baez were among those whose folk-inspired protest songs became very popular in the U.S., while the Kingston Trio had a #1 hit song with their version of the folk ballad Tom Dooley in 1958. In the UK, the post-war folk revival also focused on work music such as sea shanties and industrial labor songs. The leading figures of the revival in the UK, Ewan MacColl and A.L. Lloyd, were involved with trade unions and socialist politics. Martin Carthy was another major figure of the 1960s folk scene. He influenced Bob Dylan and Simon and Garfunkel, who used his version of Scarborough Fair, which he learned from Ewan MacColl, for their 1968 hit version of the song, which combined the traditional tune with an anti-war song composed by Paul Simon. There was also a progressive rock movement in the 1960s and 70s, which focused on elevated musicianship. As in the US, the UK also saw the development of folk rock with acts such as Fairport Convention and Donovan, and the rise of Celtic rock with groups like Thin Lizzy, whose version of Whiskey in the Jar is still popular, and the Pogues. There was another resurgence in the popularity of traditional folk music in the 1990s, with Kate Rusby, Nancy Kerr, and Seth Lakeman seeing some mainstream success. Lakeman, as we've mentioned, wrote the song The Ballad of Midsomer County and can be heard singing it as Johnny Carver.
Let's look at our cast highlights, and since we keep talking about Seth Lakeman, let's talk a little about Seth Lakeman. He, of course, is Johnny Carver. He wrote the song Ballad of Midsomer County. Lakeman is an acclaimed musician who started playing with his brothers in a group called the Lakeman Brothers. Very original. The brothers then joined up with two singers to form the group Equation that released 3 albums. In the year 2000, he released his first solo album, The Punch Bowl, followed by another album, Kitty J, that received silver status in the UK and was nominated for the prestigious Mercury Music Prize. Since then, he's toured and recorded extensively and is considered one of the top folk musicians of his generation. Seth was asked to not only write the song, but to play Johnny Carver in the voiceover, which he says was his first time doing any kind of acting, and that both he and Lucy Jones both said that they had just a really strong singing connection in recording the Ballad of Midsomer County.
Yeah, there's a really lovely video of them talking about it, as well as some of the other cast members that you can find if you just Google it. Seth Lakeman, Midsomer. There's some great stuff you can find just Googling that.
There's great stuff you could find by Googling everything. And also, stuff you don't ever want to see.
We'll talk about that when we talk about Black Lace.
No, we won't. Lucy Jones played up-and-coming singer Melody Carver. Jones is Welsh, and her first claim to fame was as a contestant on the 6th series of The X Factor, the British singing competition show, and ended up finishing 8th, losing in an incredibly controversial elimination to the duo Jedward, in what is considered by many one of the worst decisions Simon Cowell has ever made, because he was the deciding vote, and Jedward suck. Jones went on to a lot of musical theater. She's played several different characters in Les Mis. She's appeared in the Queen musical We Will Rock You. She appeared in American Psycho. Remember when that was a musical? Legally Blonde. That's also a musical? Rent. The Wedding Singer. Hey, do you remember when musicals were original? And Waitress. That was also a movie. She also performed for the UK in the 2017 Eurovision Song Contest, singing the song Never Give Up on You. Currently, Jones is back on the West End in Les Mis, this time playing Fantine. Sean Glider is angry sound man too old for cargo shorts Danny Carver. Before he studied acting, he actually earned a degree in modern history and Third World Studies. But acting apparently was in his blood, and he made his professional debut in 1987. He's best known for his role as Paddy McGuire in the original Shameless. He left the show after the 7th series with a lot of rumors stating the cause as his terrible relationship with co-star Tina Malone, who played his wife. He also appeared in the 90s Hornblower series of TV movies, the Sycorax leader in David Tennant's very first Doctor Who episode, Poldark, Our Girl, and Gangs of New York.
Dean Andrews was overly devoted Tom Asher. Now, it's shocking that he does not sing in this episode because before he was an actor, Dino, which is his actual nickname, was a singer in clubs and on cruise ships for 20 years. He switched over to acting after the great Ken Loach gave him a role in his film The Navigators. He's had a steady acting career ever since, most notably as mustachioed D.S. Ray Starling on the shows Life on Mars and its sequel Ashes to Ashes. He also appeared on Last Tango in Halifax, Father Brown, Agatha and the Truth of Murder, and currently on Emmerdale. Claudie Blakely was Barcelona dreaming Claire Asher. Upon graduating London's Central School of Speech and Drama in 1997, she appeared as Wendy in a National Theatre Christmas production of Peter Pan with the great Ian McKellen, where she was hailed as a fresh new talent. She would go on to win an award for her role in a production of The Seagull. She's in Gosford Park, Severance, Pride and Prejudice, Lark Rise to Candleford, Grantchester, and Man vs. Bee. In 2023, she's played Mrs. Devine in the most recent series of Father Brown, and she also married the actor Ross Anderson. Congrats to her, but he has not been on Midsomer. Reiki Ayola was Alice, terrible memory, Winning. Ayola was born in Cardiff and is of Yoruba descent. Even though she left high school to pursue acting before taking her A-levels, she still went on to the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama. See, kids, you don't really need high school. She's done a lot of Shakespeare, as well as the title role of Dido, Queen of Carthage, at the Globe Theatre. On screen, she is best known for 3 seasons of Holby City, as well as spots on The Pact, Being April, The Offenders, Shetland, Grace, and Dread. In 2005, she was voted the 29th sexiest woman in Wales on Wales Online. And they said, and I'm quoting here, so please don't send email, "One of our favorite thesps. She's black, beautiful, and the term yummy mummy should have been made for her." I wouldn't have mentioned that except that it's on her Wikipedia page, and we get the strong impression that she's been writing her listing. Rosalind March played doting mother Liz Gray. She began her TV and film career in 1979 with an appearance in The Racing Game, part of the Dick Francis thrillers. She's had a steady career since then, appearing in Life Without George, London Bridge, East is East, Calendar Girls, Call the Midwife, Doctors, and most recently in Father Brown and Vera. Daniel Bucklebank was her perfect son, Brian Gray. He started acting at the age of 14, and one of his earliest roles was Ralph in a stage production of Lord of the Flies at the RSC. He also starred in Cressida with Michael Gambon and directed by Sir Nicholas Hittner. On screen, he's appeared in Shakespeare in Love, The Hours, Emmerdale Farm, WPC 56, and Holby City. But he will be recognizable to most people for his long-running role as Billy Mayhew on the soap opera Coronation Street, which he's been playing since 2014. Stephen Hagan was stupid hat-wearing folk star Jay Templeton. A graduate of the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Arts, he's appeared on stage with the RSC as well as in a production of Cyrano de Bergerac with Joseph Fiennes. On screen, he was in The Cut, A Royal Christmas, Risen, Lucky Man, and most recently in You. That's Y-O-U. Therese Bradley played Shouldn't Have Come Back, Heather Carver. She's a Scottish actress who has appeared in Glasgow Kiss, Young Adam, Filth, Peaky Blinders, Shetland, Vigil, The Ipcris Files, Outlander, and River City. She also appears in the greatest zombie Christmas musical ever, Anna and the Apocalypse. Stuart St. Paul played the recipient of the worst meal ever, Toby Winning. He's a real jack of all trades, a director, a writer, an actor, and a stunt coordinator. He's had bit parts in a number of things, but he did stunt work in Superman 2, Pink Floyd's The Wall, Never Say Never Again, and Batman. But his biggest claim to fame is that he was one of the stunt coordinators who operated the right side of the Queen Alien in James Cameron's classic Aliens. Currently, he writes crime novels.
That might be one of the coolest credits I've ever seen.
That is pretty cool. Yeah, I was the Queen Alien.
Half the Queen Alien.
Like her right arm.
I was her right hand. For return visitors this week, well, this was an episode where the main cast was all new, but there was a number of Midsomer veteran background actors who might not have any lines, but helped fill out the world of a music festival. We had Sean Lucas, who has appeared in 7 episodes of Midsomer, including Written in the Stars, The Incident at Cooper Hill, Crime and Punishment, Last Man Out, and With Bated Breath. He's also appeared in uncredited roles in such high-quality things like Skyfall, Muppets Most Wanted, and Strippers vs. Werewolves. John W.D. Harley also appeared in the episodes Let Us Pray, The Flying Club, and A Vintage Murder. Sadly, he passed away in November 2014, just a few months before his last 2 Midsomer episodes aired. Ricky Rajpal appeared with Harley in A Vintage Murder, as well as The Dagger Club and Murder by Magic. He's also appeared in The Brothers Grimsby, London Has Fallen, and Mission Impossible, Rogue Nation. Thank you to all the background and character actors in this episode for making the world come alive. We wish there was 100 more of you to make it look like that festival was profitable. Our village star this week is the great Clark Peters, who played pub owner and guy who has trouble opening umbrella, Roger Wainwright. Born Peter Clark in New York City in 1952, he grew up in New Jersey with dreams of being an actor after a role at the age of 12 in a local production of My Fair Lady. After high school, Peters moved to Paris to work on a production of Hair that he eventually starred in. In 1973, he moved to London and began working in West End musicals like I Got a Shoe, Bubbling Brown Sugar, and Porgy and Bess, before graduating to starring roles in Chicago and The Iceman Cometh. He wrote the acclaimed musical revue Five Guys Named Mo, which was very popular back in the 90s. Now, on film, his first role was in 1979's The Music Machine, going on to appear in Outland, Mona Lisa, Notting Hill, and K-Pax. In 2002, Peters appeared in the role he was probably best known for, Detective Lester Freeman on The Wire, or as the show's fans call it, "Hey bro, you seen The Wire?" Freeman would go on to work with Wire creator David Simon on his New Orleans set show Treme, which I think he is absolutely a genius in that performance. The miniseries Show Me a Hero, and he appeared in an episode of The Deuce. He's also appeared in several Spike Lee joints, most notably in Da 5 Bloods, for which he received a BAFTA nomination. He has almost too many other credits to list, including His Dark Materials, John Wick, 3 Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri. Early in his career, Peters formed a soul band called The Majestics and sang background on the songs like Love and Affection and Boogie Nights. Now, in an interview about his performance on Midsomer, Peters said, "Frank is a guy who is not that far from where I am. His journey is something I am very familiar with, as I play guitar with a group called the Dylanites. Singing and playing in Midsomer Murders was a journey down memory lane, and it all came back to me. But what was far from me was going out to Midsomer County. Oh, baby, that is worlds apart from Baltimore. I filmed on the mean streets of Baltimore, but those night scenes in spooky woods in Midsomer sure were enough to scare me."
Yeah, him and Ben Jones.
I gotta say, it's like if Midsommar's scarier than the Baltimore streets of the, oof. Then again, the relative crime rate of Midsomer is probably that of Baltimore back at the time of The Wire. So
I was going to say it may be higher.
Yeah. So I thought Clark Peters was fantastic in this. He got to sing, he got to do all kinds of stuff. He is an effortless actor. Everything he does it just seems believable and natural. And I just loved him in this.
Yeah, he has a very natural way of line reading that the way, just even something a song, the way he did the lines, "You shouldn't have come back," were just really quite excellent.
Yeah. I hope he comes back someday.
Yeah, that would be great. But he died.
I'm not in the same. That's it for the first half. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back in the second half of The Ballad of Midsomer County. And we're back. Let's look at the second half of The Ballad of Midsomer County.
What on earth are you doing?
Broadening her musical horizons.
This is awful.
What do you mean awful? That's our song, in case you've forgotten.
That is not our song.
You said it was your favourite.
When?
At the Freshers' Ball. Which I didn't go to with you.
Well, whoever you did go with, she certainly left an impression.
Well, the roses in Brian's dead mouth is another shout out to The Ballad of Midsomer County. Barnaby thinks this is all about the festival moving to London, with the village angry at the dead guys who are trying to take their livelihood. Gray's last call was to Frank Wainwright, who claims it was just about an invoice, but Nelson finds a pair of boots with a tread that matches what he found outside Carver's cottage. Speaking of Danny Carver, he goes to the abandoned cottage and finds signs that someone has been there. He pries up a floorboard, expecting to find something. But whatever it is, it's gone. Over at the Hotel George, things are poppin'. Tom and Claire were friends with the Carvers and Frank back in the day, and they host a wake for winning. Tom asks Claire if she's planning to move to Spain after he discovers a brochure, but she denies it. But then Tom surprises her by saying, "Hell yeah, let's go for it." She just walks away. Meanwhile, Alice bugs Tom for a job, and Claire tries to keep Melody away from folk musician Jay. Then Danny bursts in and attacks Frank, accusing him of stealing the missing Johnny Carver album. Danny hid it after his brother's death because the music industry is full of ghouls. Frank was the only other person who knew where it was, but Frank says it wasn't him. Jay whisks Melody away to the magical abandoned cottage and says he is a Johnny Carver superfan. Toby, winning, apparently told him he had the missing album, and now Jay thinks Melody has it. He grabs her, but she smacks him in his stupid hat and runs off. Frank finally admits that the phone call with Brian was about the album and how he found it on Winning's laptop, but Frank has found a more interesting prize. Danny's missing wife and Melody's missing mom, Heather. She's the hooded figure who was hanging around the cottage. She ran off all those years ago because she was an alcoholic. Now that she's sober, she's back to meet her daughter, but is terrified of Danny's anger. Barnaby discovers that Winning had paid for recording sessions for Melody and realizes this is all about the missing album. He confronts Melody, who admits to learning about the hiding place through Frank and giving the album to Winning. Danny is enraged and storms off yet again, this time for the pub, but freezes when he sees Heather exit. That night, Frank investigates some music in the pub's yard and finds a juniper bush. One more ballad reference before he is stabbed to death with an umbrella stand. Nelson gets super duper curious about the death of Johnny Carver and sees some inconsistencies in the coroner's report. So he has a team go over the cottage where he was shot. Lo and behold, they find evidence that Johnny was actually murdered, which answers the question why someone is killing over this recording. It has something they don't want people to hear. Everyone is trying to run away in this episode. Frank was buying the hotel from Claire, who is trying to escape her marriage to Tom. The police find Danny trying to run off when they question him about Frank's death. But that's because Danny can't handle the return of Heather, who had an affair with his brother back in the day. Heather finally approaches Melody, who doesn't recognize her. She tells her that Johnny is her father, not Danny, and that Heather left because she thought Johnny had killed himself over his guilt. Melody does not react well. Barnaby gets the final piece of the puzzle when Alice, now a cleaning lady at the hotel, tells him that Claire was also in love with Johnny way back when. Barnaby and Nelson race to the cottage where they find Claire trapped there by a shotgun-wielding Tom playing the lost album on the laptop. Here's the reveal. Tom knew about Claire's affair with Johnny and was corrupted by his jealousy. So he killed Johnny and made it look like a suicide. But Tom didn't know the murder had been recorded. Frank and Danny buried the tape without listening to it because they are idiots. Both Winning and Brian tried to blackmail Tom for money when they heard it. They clearly didn't think that one all the way through because they did. He believed Frank was forcing Claire to sell the hotel, but no, Claire wanted to get away from her warm and loving husband. Nelson distracts Tom and Barnaby wrestles the gun away from him, ending the standoff. And even though he almost took a bullet for him, Barnaby still makes Nelson babysit so John and Sarah can go to the final night of the festival to watch Melody make her debut. She calls out Danny as her father and begins to play the Ballad of Midsomer County. John sees Heather standing in the back, still separated from her daughter.
Nelson looked like a good babysitter, though.
So the killer, this is another obsession and jealousy making for a deadly combo. You know, I thought the episode was leaning pretty hard towards Danny until like the last half hour or so.
Yeah.
Nice little swerve there. But also I think it didn't help that Tom and Claire are pretty much not a part of anything until that last reveal.
Yeah, they almost seem on the periphery. You're kind of not sure, other than the fact that they own the hotel that a lot of people are staying at. You don't really get the idea that they are as connected to everyone as they really are. If they had interacted a bit more with other people in a more personal, not a professional way, I think that would have given a few more clues as to what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, look, it was a nice swerve. It is all like, it's a classic mystery trope. It's the one you least suspect, or the one that's like, oh, they have no reason to be involved in this, and all of a sudden you find that thing that they're involved. It was just struck to me, like I was making notes watching this going, why are they in this episode? They're not doing anything.
Yeah, if there had been something or some mention that Claire had lived in the town all her life, and that way
there's a throwaway comment. There's a throwaway comment like halfway through where they're like, hey, we were friends with them back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, it's like there is no mention.
Yeah. So
he kills Johnny Carver in the middle of a recording session. Doesn't realize that the tape machine was running.
You would think he would have checked that.
And then nobody listens to the tape, ever.
Yeah.
They're just like, well, here's the tape. We're just going to bury it. And I'm like, oh.
Always listen to the tape, dudes.
Yeah. And I guess the funny thing is like this whole thing about, it's this missing album. Wouldn't take a brainiac to realize, well, the people that called in the death, right? Like, I guess they didn't really say who called in the death, did they?
No, because apparently, and it's mentioned that Danny finds the body, but it's 3 days later. He's been dead for three days.
Yeah, so that's the thing, is just like, so he's been dead for 3 days. It didn't call, like, I guess they called it in, but then wouldn't, I don't know. It's very confusing.
And they're dissing some of the detective and forensic work that Tom Barnaby and George Bullard did, because this happened 25 years ago, which would have been before the series started, but Tom had been there for a little while, and you kind of got the idea that George had been too. So unless he was on vacation and somebody else took over.
Maybe it was maybe it was the Toby Jones doctor.
What struck me is that Tom didn't seem somebody who would have tied everything in with the ballad, because he would have known the ballad, but he wasn't really in the music industry. And it seemed like red herrings that really didn't work.
Yeah. I mean, well, first of all, he shot Johnny Carver.
Yeah.
We don't understand the reasoning of why the symbolic things, like it's a pretty extreme thing to drown a guy in a bowl of water that also happens to have eels and eggs in it.
Yeah.
And, killing the guy with the speakers, fine. That's use what it's at hand. But like, if you're also planning to kill these guys, you're just like, no, I'm going to grab one of these unwieldy umbrella stands and then shove it into him. It's like, dude, get a knife. I mean,
yeah. And it directed everything to Johnny, which eventually was the solution.
Yeah.
If they had just been seen as more random killings without those little bits of the Ballad of Midsomer County lyrics callbacks in them, I don't think they would have connected Johnny as much to the murders as they did.
Yeah, I mean, it was an unnecessary call out. Also, I kind of thought it was hilarious that Claire has standing there with her shotgun holding husband listening to this lost album, and she's real slow at figuring out that he might be the murderer.
Yeah, I think she's a bit in denial, even though she doesn't really love him. But yep. Yeah, I love it though when he says, "Yeah, there's no need to be afraid. I'm your husband," and every woman in the world is going, "Yeah, dude, we know how many husbands kill their wives."
Yeah, that was not
beat their wives, etc. Yeah, but that is what a guy like that would say. I'm your husband. I wouldn't hurt you. Before he's getting ready to shoot her.
Which makes me think he might have been violent over the years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking of complicated family relations, the Carvers, very messy backstory there.
Yeah.
So she was married to Danny. She sleeps with Johnny. So did she just marry Danny to get close to Johnny?
I have a feeling that Johnny was not the marrying kind, and that was the way she could be closest to Johnny.
Yeah. And then that scene where she comes back. First of all, it is that sort of weird attic thing of, well, I need to make this right. Not kind of like thinking like, well, what are the like, how would this actually affect the person she's dropping the bomb on?
Yeah.
Because that scene between Melody and her mom is a heartbreaker.
Yeah.
But it was really more about the mom wanting to get something off her chest. And try to force this relationship with her daughter, as opposed to, hey, I'm around. If you want to spend some time, we could do that.
And the way she played it off initially as just a friend was weird. It seemed like the wrong way to go about it, because it felt very manipulative. Like she was trying to learn about her daughter before she told her who she was and everything.
Also, the fact that Melody's sitting there staring at this woman who looks a lot like her in the face, like, I don't know who you are.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess, there's just that one kind of album photo of her from the back, but I guess they didn't have any other photos of her in the house because Danny was very heartbroken by her.
Oh, Danny 100% burnt everything.
Yeah.
But she still looks so much like Melody.
Yeah.
It was a smart bit of casting.
Yeah.
The theme, I think, because the line gets said twice. You shouldn't have come back. Frank says it. Melody says it both times to Heather. I thought that was kind of like, that you can't go home again sort of thing.
Yeah. And that does crop up in many mysteries, as well as in Midsomer as well, in many episodes.
Yeah. And in the very end, Melody on stage, calls out Danny as her father. Her mother is still in the back. There's the distance,
Mm-hmm.
that distance between them that, may never get crossed. It was a sad ending, I thought.
It was, but I thought that her connection with Danny was so strong because he finally accepted what she wanted to do. He'd come to a reconciliation within himself of who his daughter was and the talent that she had. And she's always known that he was her father, no matter what.
100%. Jay Templeton was kind of a weird character.
Yeah, the tiny hat, a very What's funny is that she knocks his hat off and he disappears from the plot.
It was his magic hat. It's what keeps him grounded. I mean, that hat was like, this episode was when? 2010?
2015.
That hat was so 90s.
Yeah.
It's like a late 90s, early 2000s annoying hipster hat. Like, it just...
Yeah, he was not the future of folk music. He was the 90s passive folk music.
Do we even hear him play?
We do, in the pub, during the wake, or the memorial.
It happened so fast. I was like...
Mm-hmm.
And then he just doesn't show up for the... he's left. I was like, This festival sucks.
Yeah. I lost my hat. It's got dirt on it. I am taking my tiny little hat and I am leaving.
Strange kill. Well, it's a twofer. You have the eels and eggs and the umbrella stand.
Yeah. It takes a long time to drown someone, actually. And I know they do this in every movie and TV show where somebody is drowning or they're suffocating them. It doesn't take them long, and then the person stops moving, at which point they're just unconscious. They're not dead yet, and then they're let go.
Yeah.
But I guess if you're unconscious and his head is still in the bowl full of water, eels, and eggs, that he's probably still drowning.
I thought that both murders felt particularly violent.
Mm-hmm.
You see the thrashing, the force of the guy drowning. And Clark Peters sold the hit with the umbrella so beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
I felt the impact. I felt the life going out of him. It was, these were brutal.
Yeah. I mean, even getting crushed by the amps and would be pretty awful. Yeah. Yeah,
but just, the guy couldn't, sadly, the guy didn't get the opportunity to do much more than kind of like gasp and but like Peters, like the impact, he sold the impact, he sold the pain, the noises he made. It was very visceral.
Yeah.
Kind of going back to the eels and eggs. So the bowl.
Mm-hmm.
What the hell was the deal with that bowl?
What's weird is that it's taken off the shelf, so if Liz had lived there until recently, her fingerprints would be on the bowl.
Well, she did do any cooking.
Well, no, I mean, not Liz, the wife.
Alice. Well, that was the thing. Because first of all, Liz says she'd never seen the bowl in the house, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we didn't see the killer bring the bowl. The bowl was there.
Yeah, it was taken off the shelf. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I guess they made it kind of a point that Liz never did any cooking, but
she would have dusted around it.
She would have seen it.
Yeah.
So, they made this whole deal of well, how'd the bowl get there? And then how did Alice's fingerprint? As soon as they ascertained why Alice's fingerprint was on the bowl, that plot point got dropped entirely.
Mm-hmm.
It was almost like, well, this isn't working. Let's cut it.
Yeah.
Also, the gunshot residue.
Mm-hmm.
I was curious about that, whether you could actually find gunshot residue 2+ decades later.
Yeah.
And I guess it's hard to say because most gunshot residue tests seems to center around your hands.
Yeah.
But apparently that if it's like on surfaces and if it's not cleaned, it could technically be around for a while.
Okay.
Because I always thought gunshot residue was almost like microscopic, but it's apparently the consistency of flour, which makes you think that if you fired a gun, you would feel that on you.
Yeah. And I can see that if it were to land on like a rough boarding, like in that cabin, and I don't think it was ever cleaned after, the murder, at least not thoroughly, that it would possibly last that long.
Yeah. And then I noticed, Nelson did a lot of good detective work, but I also noticed his vest. So when he goes to the cottage, he has it on the outside under his coat. And then for some reason, when he gets to the office, he takes off both his coat and his vest.
Eric, it's
Why?
cold out. It's cold outside.
He didn't zip up his jacket, Eileen.
It was a fashion statement. As somebody who dresses in layers a lot, I had no problem with the way he handled the vest thing.
No, but that's not what you do a vest for. Like if if the vest is a fashion statement, you leave it on. It's not vests aren't warm things. That's why they don't have sleeves.
Was it a vest or was it a cardigan? Because I never, you never saw it without the jacket. Yeah.
That's true. That is true. But it looked like a vest.
Maybe it was hot in the police station.
It looked to me like, well, Barnaby's going to make me wear a stupid thing. I'm going to wear this is what I'm wearing.
Yeah, he still doesn't dress up too much.
No. Corner. So we find out Kate doesn't get to do a lot, but we do find out she's a folk music fan, and she does instruct them about the Ballad of Midsomer County.
Mm-hmm.
There was a point in the episode where Barnaby was threatening Brian Gray with some forensic accounting.
Yeah,
and I was like, they're going to make Kate do that, aren't they? She didn't get a lot to do, but there was, she got like a one good solid moment.
Yeah. And
then the home life, a huge chunk of this episode revolves around music at the old Barnaby's. John is not happy with the song that Sarah's playing in the morning for baby Betty.
Wheels in the bus go round and round.
Yep. And makes the wild claim that Sarah has no taste in music, even though John has also proven he does not have great taste in music either.
Well, you know who does have good taste in music?
Who?
Sykes.
Mm-hmm.
And also Nelson, because, he soon becomes Brian May of Queen. So
yeah. John calls out Sarah, I guess, liked something called Black Lace Album, which Eileen and I were not super familiar with, so we Googled this. If you're in England, you probably know this already, but for American listeners, so Black Lace are a British pop band. They are best known for doing some novelty party records, including their biggest hit, Agadoo, which is a...
it's an atrocity.
Yeah, it is not a fun earworm at all.
No.
Makes Baby Shark downright beautiful. The band first came to the public eye after being selected to represent the UK in the 1979 Eurovision Song Contest. They finished 7th with the song Marianne.
How they finished 7th, maybe there were only 17 groups, I don't know, but I have to say, that is one Google I regret making, because I will be haunted by dancing pineapples for forever.
I think it's funny that John calls out Sarah's taste in music, and then when he plays his, what he thinks is their song, and what he thinks is a good song, it is just the most blandest, some light rock song you could possibly... It's so flavorless, it might as well be white bread.
It's sort of so, and I guess it's like a generic 80s pop song ballad that you kind of think, do I recognize this? I don't really recognize this.
It had a Bryan Adams feel to it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't Bryan Adams.
No.
Because this show could not afford Bryan Adams songs.
No, they've already played to have a whole folk song written for the show, so they couldn't afford to get a really good one.
But a lot of the John and Sarah moments centers around the fact that John cannot remember what their song is. At one point, playing a song for her, absolutely confident that it is their song, and then realizes in a beautifully horrific scene that this is not only not their song, it is the song he had with an old girlfriend pre-Sarah.
That was a very funny scene. I love Fiona Dolman in that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And she lets him off of the hook at the end by he thinks he's finally found the song. She says, "Yes, this is it," and then admits to Nelson that it is not it. But so we still don't know what their song is. It quite possibly is Agadoo.
It possibly is. All I know is that when Nelson is left with the baby, little baby Betty, and he turns off the music, you just know he's putting on Bohemian Rhapsody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Final thoughts.
This is a fun episode, but also a very haunting episode. There are some really funny scenes, especially the home life stuff, and some of the music back and forth on it. But the mystery is haunting. The relationships, especially in the Carvers, is very heartbreaking. And I have to say, they really nailed it with that folk song. If that folk song had not worked,
mm-hmm.
the episode wouldn't have worked. And they did, and it worked beautifully.
100%. Like the fact is like this episode, that song, my feeling is they probably said, "Hey, we'll give you like a large chunk of the royalties of whatever
the
soundtrack, sells or to Seth Lakeman." But that song is haunting. It is creepy, and it is like the perfect Ballad of Midsomer County. And 100% agree. This episode does not work if that song doesn't work, and they nailed it, and therefore the episode kind of nails it. I think this is a strong, creepy, solid mystery, well acted.
Very well acted, yeah.
The ridiculousness of like a 20 people folk festival aside, it works. And I kind of like it when Midsomer gets a little dark. Like I think sometimes it can get too goofy. It embraces too much of the ridiculousness of what they're doing. And this sort of embraces the darkness, and like the guy's motivation is really simple. It's obsession and jealousy.
Yeah.
Didn't seem like that far-fetched. The way he murdered people was a little weird, and they never really explained it.
Yeah.
But
well, the whole thing about the obsession and the jealousy, those are classic folk ballad themes.
Yeah.
And so it really ties in very well with the whole folk ballad. And yeah, I think this is a good, solid episode.
Oh, it's a great episode.
Yeah.
Great episode.
Yeah.
Well, that's everything that we wanted to talk about. We want to thank everyone for listening to us. If you had anything you wanted to discuss about the Ballad of Midsomer County or Midsomer Murders, feel free to email us at welcometomidsomer@gmail.com. If you want us to use the email in the show, please say so in said email. We are also Welcome to Midsomer on Facebook and Instagram, where we do post what our upcoming episodes will be about, so please follow us on there. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing to us or rating and reviewing us or following us on your favorite podcast app. All that stuff really helps people find us. Tell all your friends about us, especially if your friends are really into Midsomer. We will be back soon, and we hope you will join us again. And as we take the road out of Midsomer, we want to thank you for listening and remind you that in Midsomer, folk festivals can be murder.
On your ears, burn!
Welcome to Midsomer is produced by Eric Buscher and Eileen Becker. All clips in this podcast are used in compliance with the U.S. Copyrights Act Fair Use Exemption for criticism and commentary. Our logo and podcast art was designed by Smeedrai. Our theme music is by the infamous Space.
Midsomer, Midsomer, I'm gonna kill this guy named John Henry. Okay, that was not my...
know how this episode's going to end.